before anyone runs away and thinks that we're being callous or wanting to kill people's grandparents, the main point, I guess, that you're trying to make, and correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong, is that the lockdowns themselves, whilst they may have saved and prevented some lives from stopping the spread or of the virus in some way, that the cost in terms of suicides, damage to children's development, people's mental health, other diseases going undiagnosed, untreated, and the sort of complete gearing of everything towards COVID is producing a much higher cost, and that's the reason that you felt it was a really bad idea.
Yes, that's exactly the premise. I'm not saying COVID was not bad. It was bad. It's not as bad as the press has made it out to be, but it's certainly worse than an ordinary flu, and has killed a lot of people. 600,000 in the U.S. Some people believe those numbers are inflated, and I think they may be a little bit, but that's not really my point. I accept those numbers, which is, let's see, 600,000 would be about 2 in 1,000 people in the United States. But the costs are, the harms just vastly exceed the benefits. When you look into how much this has increased depression, my biggest point, the biggest catastrophe is clinical depression. It's absolutely staggering. But also suicides and drug overdose deaths. And those people, the suicides and drug overdose deaths those are far younger people than the people dying of COVID. So it's far more person years of life lost, far more years of life lost per person. And when you multiply it the number of persons, it's significantly more person years of life lost from the suicides and drug overdose deaths we're causing. Yes, and the children, what we've done to children and closed their schools is just, I have big moral problems with that, and I can't understand how there hasn't been more debate about that. So we can go into all that, but on the children, they're at lower risk of dying from COVID. COVID is much less deadly for children, for anyone under age 18, than influenza is. So closing the schools was done, had the effect of harming children. It has no benefit at all to the children. So we decided to sacrifice the interests of children for the interests of their grandparents and great-grandparents. I just think that's nuts. I don't, and there's hardly been any discussion of that, hardly been any acknowledgement that that's what we did, but that's what we did.
Yeah, I mean, there was I feel part of the problem is some people have put it clumsily when they've been talking about this. So there was a person who in the UK called Lord Sumption. He's a ex judge from the UK, and like really highly regarded. And he was basically talking about the effect of the lockdowns on years of life lost, and the fact that in days gone by it was kind of understood that, or his opinion was, it was understood that we value children's lives above the lives of parents and grandparents because they had the most potential. They were the ones that those are the people whose lives we valued more because of the potential. Like if a child dies, you feel worse than if an adult dies because you see all those years of potential living gone.
Yeah.
And he was kind of dismissed as being callous, but on the grounds that we should value every life, and that if we let the children get COVID, that they might get long COVID, or they might inadvertently spread it to grandparents or other people who were more vulnerable. What would be your response to people who kind of make that assertion?
Well, first, they're wrong factually and scientifically about that there was any benefit to closing schools. It did not prevent any deaths at all, actually. And we knew
How do you come to that? How do you come to that like figure? So what calculation are you making there?
Well, I actually come to the conclusion that the whole lockdown strategy entirely didn't prevent any COVID deaths at all, because there's no correlation of the strength of lockdown strategy to number of deaths between nations of the world or between states of the United States. It's a total scattershot. Sweden, for instance, is the one major country that did not do the lockdown strategy. They've got fewer deaths per capita, COVID deaths per capita, than the United States, Britain, France, Italy, Spain, and Switzerland. More than Germany, but fewer than all those other countries. And when you go beyond that, the whole strategy didn't, as I said, there's no correlation of the strength of lockdowns with number of COVID deaths. But with children also, we now know that asymptomatic people essentially do not transmit COVID. That's not acknowledged by the public health authorities, but that's what the data says. They may in rare cases, but the transmission rate from asymptomatic infected people with COVID is certainly less than 10%, if not zero, compare of the rate from people who are symptomatic. And children are usually asymptomatic entirely. The studies from early on, there were a few studies of schools that there was a study came out of France, one in Australia, one in Sweden, of just kind of an anecdotes basically of a particular town that closed their schools or didn't close their schools in comparison, and showing no apparent effect on COVID deaths. One town in France where before they knew COVID was there, the schools were open, and the children, there were like a dozen children known to be infected in that school. Not a single adult became infected from that. No teachers, no other adults did. In Sweden did not close their schools in the spring of 2020. The neighboring nation of Norway did. There were no deaths of children in either country from COVID. The number of cases in children did not differ between the two countries. The overall infection rate and the infection rate of teachers did not differ between the two countries. And teachers are not a high risk group in places in Sweden or places where schools were opened. They're not infected at any higher rate than any other group in society, which is different from, it was reasonable to believe at the beginning that closing schools might cut down the spread, because children are big spreaders of the common cold and influenza. But COVID just happens to behave differently, and we knew that. We knew it was behaving differently by the summer of 2020. So to me, it's just scandalous that anybody closed schools in the fall of 2020 and beyond. There was no reason to do that.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. Don't forget our sponsor, ExpressVPN, and my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, can both be found in the links in the description below. And also, please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow. Until next time, thanks for listening. Screw the hedge funds.
You can make as many rules as you want, but if there's no teeth behind them, what's the point?
Well, like Citadel is potentially just gone in a few months. It feels like financial institutions, that they are all laughing at us by buying GME. Screw the hedge funds. Like, I will lose my entire investment if it brings them down.
Why on earth, last May, could you buy the entire company for $200 million?
What's been happening on Reddit and in social media and in the marketplace has never been seen before.
I argue that nothing is off the table. There is nothing off the table when dealing with the volumes of money in something as big as the United States stock market.
The hedge funds have clearly underestimated a group of people raised on Friday night World of Warcraft raids.
Dark pools, they're another mechanism to manipulate and cheat. Mainstream journalists don't say these things for a number of reasons. One is their sources are the people that I'm talking about, and so they can't call somebody a crook.
Superstonk and the other communities that have emerged are a hive mind, the likes of which we have never seen before. It's madness and brilliance, insanity and genius all rolled into one. It's very possible that Citadel will be gone in a few months, and not just Citadel, but the entire financial system has the potential to come crashing down. These crooks continue to gamble recklessly with the world economy, and this could be the moment that they finally get their justice.